Power of Shape is USISPF's newest podcast series where we showcase the brilliance of women professionals across an eclectic mix of industry and amplify the voices of inspiring women in leadership, riveting dialogues, and candid conversations to uncover her story. We intend to go beyond the boardroom and perhaps to the virtual drawing room where we can have intimate, heartfelt conversation focused on getting to know the person beyond the persona. Today, my guest is Inderpreet Sawhney, the Chief Legal Officer and Chief Compliance Officer at Infosys. Inderpreet, thank you so much for chatting with us and welcome to the Power of Shape.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, the pleasure is all mine, all ours rather. And Inderpreet, I wanted to kind of just say, like, when I hear about Infosys, it's a household name for people in India, and you're based in the United States here. In some ways, you're at USISPF. You kind of represent the strength of both democracies, United States and India. And I think Infosys is a perfect catalyst for that because not only do you represent hard power in terms of soft power, in terms of software rather, and India's IT services, but what you also represent is the diaspora strength, the fact that the Indian diaspora in the US is codified with IT and tech brilliance. So, do you see that as a perfect example of corporate diplomacy?
Very interesting question. I've often thought about what makes my job in particular interesting. And one of the things that I delight in is the fact that it lets me leverages both my homes, the home of my birth and my adopted country where we've now been living for several years. And in many ways, the IT industry showcases the best of both these worlds, right? Here you have a country with tremendous talent pool, the ability to execute scale, and support organizations, companies, many of which we are fortunate to have as our customers, and help them run their technology, digital, cutting edge adoption of new areas of technological development that are happening. And this marriage of both countries leveraging the strengths is somewhat ideal. And yes, the largest and the most powerful democracy sort of coming together. And more than diplomacy, I would say it's a reflection of friendship. It's a reflection of being able to leverage each other's strengths and opportunities, which provides the best of each country. Through this partnership, being able to access the best of both these countries.
For a lot of us growing up in India, Infosys is sort of this perfect household name. It needs little introduction. And given, as we talked about, the strength of the IT services, uh, and I also want to talk about what was very special when we heard about the Infosys stories. Like when my dad told me about it, was about the visionary leadership of Mr. Narayan Murthy and Mr. Nandan Nilekani and the other founders as well. Like it epitomized excellence with ethics and brilliance. How much of that has shaped you as a leader, both as an Infosys leader and also in your journey, the pre-Infosys story as well, and that you continue to take forward when you deal with your mentees and subordinates and others that you meet in the industry?
I was reflecting on this actually in conversation with a colleague of mine last week as to the good fortune that we have at Infosys of having the values that we hold near and dear to us, right? The legacy left to us by our founders and co-founders. You're absolutely right. It's a brilliant story of the founders coming together, literally the dream of any entrepreneur, right? You take a small amount of capital, some very dedicated, in this case, it happened to be all men, but brilliant technologists who put together. And today, I think Infosys as a global powerhouse, close to 100 billion in market cap, 20 billion in revenue, 300,000 employees, is really a household name, particularly in India. And one of the most cherishable things about all of this is that it's built on great values, the values of excellence, the values of client centricity, fairness, and all of that allows you to do your, at least for me in particular, do my job in a way that I'm not having to second guess myself, which is not to say that you don't have difficult and challenging conversations. Of course you do. But at the end of the day, you know what your North Star is and you stay focused on that. And these are values that we somewhat take for granted, but it's not often the case, right? Corporate world is filled with challenges that may be somewhat different in different organizations. And I feel fortunate that this is something that we can embrace without hesitation.
Speaking of hesitations and embracing it, we all have that hesitation when we take a big leap of faith. Your journey was also one of an immigrant, and I always say this because the word immigrant is both a simple word but with a very profound meaning to it, right? And your own journey, you grew up in India, you came to Canada for law school, then you worked in the U.S., California, now Texas based. Um, because the idea of immigration is you're a different person from when you arrived. You come with both our literal baggage and of course the weight of expectations of what to expect, and you are a different person then and you grow into a different person because your experiences are different, a different culture. So talk us about your immigrant journey from being a young student to the person that you are now, part of corporate America.
So I think, aspirations are big in the mind of any immigrant, right? The baggage may be somewhat little lighter, if you will, the physical baggage. But I think the U.S. as a country has welcomed immigrants who've come here, bringing their skills, their knowledge, and has allowed the community to flourish, right? And also, just maybe going back to my background a little bit, I grew up as a army brat or as an army kid. My dad was in the Indian Army, so we moved around a lot, right? And in that moving around process, the fact that you were moving from one city to the other was not a big deal for us growing up, right? That was sort of the norm. Of course, moving to the US, first moving to Canada, going back to India, coming back to the US, and I did this a couple of more times where I've crisscrossed the continent. I've taken somewhat in my stride, a little bigger journeys than relocating from one point in India to the other. But I think what it does is it allows you to develop a skill that enables you to succeed in somewhat different environments. You grow up with this muscle memory of how do you integrate yourself in a different setting, right? Whether you are a awkward high school kid, teenager, or as a professional, right? The skill set is somewhat similar. Getting to know the people around you, figuring out common areas of interest over which you bond, and you become an integral part of that country, organization, city, location, right? So that's one. And the second thing, I think what happens is that as you live through with any life experiences, right, you mature, you learn, you adapt to what are cultural differences, and yet try and remain true to what was your original authentic self, right? And I think that's the journey, that's the challenge, the struggle of every immigrant. And the way you do it is you figure out, hopefully, the best of both the worlds, the ethos of how do you look at work and your desire to work hard versus the opportunities that a different place offers you, and you try and marry those in the best way that you can. um, and hopefully, in that process, you're bringing your best self to each of these journeys that you take in your lifetime, right? So one of the most challenging things that I had to do when I moved to California after having worked in India for 5 years was having to go back and take the bar exam. Now, when you're a student, studying and that's it, but having to go back and sort of hit the books all over again, different skill set, right? So I think those are little moments in life which you go back to what you know well, rely on it, and hope that they come through. And I think finding common ground and also learning to adapt to new situations which you may not have faced, right? You know, being brown in India is the default, whereas when you are living in the US, that's certainly not the case, right?
Mhm.
But it is a welcoming culture. There are many people like you who have shared experiences, and there are many who are completely unlike you, right? You don't have the cultural references. So you make the uh, you take what you can and make the best of what the opportunity offers you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the learning and unlearning part, and I couldn't empathize more with being a student again. I think the hardest thing is sometimes going back to school after working, because you get paid to work hard when you work, but then you're paying to work hard as a student. And speaking of the bar exam, you mentioned you're an accidental lawyer. No one in your family studied law. So where was the inspiration to go down the path, and if I may use the legal pun, raise the bar?
Mhm. Yeah, so, when I graduated, we had very little guidance as to what careers would look like. It wasn't as sophisticated as the world today is, where people are evaluating multiple career choices. So it was somewhat of a default accidental measure. And, as I literally was going to go do my master's in economics and was all set and ready to do that when I applied to law school and decided to go down that path. I wish I could say that there was some sort of flash of brilliance. It was literally an accidental opportunity that I took on. It seemed like that this was a career opportunity that might be exciting. It was a professional degree that I was working my way towards, and stumbled into it, and then decided that this is something that I really loved. The logic, the analysis, the doing good, the doing right part of it appealed very much to me. So there is no wonderful backstory as to how I ended up studying law.
Nonetheless, we're so glad that we have lawyers like you right now who can just articulate the position that we need to today, to just have the clarity of thought. And I've always admired that about lawyers. Speaking of lawyers, none more so that come to mind than the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG. Bless her soul wherever it is. You mentioned that she's obviously one of your idols, and for a lot of female lawyers like yourself, that's a very, very heavy name, and it's par for the course. On the show as well, we've had eminent lawyers like Zia Modi, who've touted her as her idol. So, what about her really stuck with you, and especially her legal wisdom, especially at times like these, where there's so much going on in the media? How does someone like her and her shattering the glass ceiling appeal to, what message do you really take away at these times?
More than just being a woman justice in the Supreme Court of United States. She was just a very tall legal leader, right? Brilliant mind who inspired many. So that's one. She did do a lot to further the cause of women in the profession. So that's really admirable about her, right? So the cases that she took on to establish the principle of equality, right? And she happened to be taking on the case of gender, but I think that's what she was espousing for. And then finally, I think she also talked a lot about the role of women in society. And I'm going to paraphrase here, but when we look at the working population, a lot of our talent is lost as life events intervene. And more often than not, it's women who end up making some of those choices where, they prioritize the career of their partners, or decide to take on roles in homemaking. And RBG famously said that we will achieve true equality when men take on the equal burden of raising the next generation. And profound words, right? Easier said than done. And it's a challenge that we all still go through in our everyday lives as we juggle priorities, decide, what's going to work, what's not going to work, who's taking what role in nuclear families. But it's a real everyday struggle, right? And so I think that was very inspirational. And then finally, her own tenacity to be able to just overcome health challenges and continue to work till the very end, demonstrating great commitment to what she believed in.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think she's such a towering leading figure today. You mentioned about idols as well. And I think closer to idol, one of the persons you mentioned is Kiran Majumdar Shaw, of course, known for expertise in biotech. So, a little different from the legal profession here. But you mentioned one of the things that you liked about her was a fierce take no prisoners approach. Tell us more about this.
Yeah. So very fortunate to have worked with Kiran when she served on the board of Infosys.
Hmm.
And again, if you read her story, sort of uh, setting up this biotech firm inspired by her own personal journey and creating this multi-billion-dollar, uh, multiple companies listed in India and the US. Absolutely, inspirational. Second, it's her style, right? Her style is one of, again, tremendous tenacity. She does not sort of take things lying down, will take on an issue, make sure the right thing gets done without, she's a very bold leader. And you, you know it's not a quality that you find often, but when you do, it's really admirable to see somebody say that we'll do the right thing with courage and speak your mind. And that's something that really appeals to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's yet the best way to shatter the glass ceiling is to sometimes go full head on into it, because you can't, it takes something of a force to break these barriers that have existed. You mentioned your career as a lawyer has been very influenced by the South Asian Bar Association, and as we talked about Infosys earlier, that epitomizes the tech strength of the large Indian workforce in the US, and perhaps codifies the strength of what the Indian diaspora here is known for, its tech excellence. But the South Asian Bar Association has also been vital in connecting legal minds like yourself from the diaspora, and sort of giving it a sense of professional community. Is that sort of how you've seen it?
The way I think about professional organizations is, and I'll often tell young professionals who are up and coming, that if you find a cause that is near and dear to your heart, right? It could be anything. It could be a professional association of, in my case, it happened to be lawyers, but it could be, let's say, if you're an HR professional of HR folks, or if you're into technology and engineering, like, a group that is outside of work, if you can associate yourself with that, because there you find common ground, but it will allow you to hone skills as a leader, which you may or may not get at work, right? Because we take a different persona to work. Two, it also allows you to intersect with people who may have a shared interest, but more varied backgrounds. And that those varied backgrounds, that diversity of thought that they bring, enables you to see things that the way that you may not have seen before. It may offer you leadership opportunities. As a young lawyer, you may not get on to the managing committee of your law firm, but you can certainly take on a leadership role at a state chapter, national chapter level, sort of build on your leadership chops, if you will. And for me in particular, the South Asian Bar Association is made up of people who have an interest in South Asia legal affairs. So it's a community for lawyers, and it's got solo lawyers, partners at the very large law firms, in-house counsel, general counsel, judges, law professors, right? Shared love of law, profession of law, yet different aspects of that. And as I mentioned earlier, because I moved into the US as a professional, I didn't grow up here. It also gave me a sense of community, that this sort of sense of belonging. So that was the second thing. And then as I spent more and more time there, taking on leadership roles, including as the president of the South Asian Bar Association of North America, it I sort of tell people that find these kind of groups that will allow you to both nurture your shared interests, but also develop your leadership skills. And one of the most wonderful things today is that you go into any city, and if there is a Saba member, you can have a nice connection over a coffee, dinner, whatever works. So you also build a community across the country.
Yeah, it's the communal impact of like forming just the kindred, connecting kindred spirits. And I think as an immigrant, it's important for people to, as you said, see your skills more than ethnicity. But from what I understand from South Asian Bar Association or SABA, it's sort of the Goldilocks formula, finding the just right, building community, but also ensuring that your skills and talent speak more than just, the fact you just belong to a demographic group. So that's the hard part to do as an immigrant, right? Like One is be proud of identity, but also allow skills to be so agnostic that people don't see identity.
No, absolutely. Look, I think it came together as a band of lawyers trying to get together, finding common ground. It's grown from those kitchen table, 10 lawyers getting together to a large community today, highly sophisticated in advocating issues for the community, making sure that, are the voice of the diaspora is heard, and also creating, nurturing future leaders of tomorrow through conferences, through leadership institutes. And, it looks like a very different organization that I left behind. And I'm so very proud of the work that this group continues to do today.
Inderpreet, you wear a very two different hats, right? In some ways, you are a lawyer by training, you are a legal counsel, but because you work at in-house for a large tech firm, in some ways, is that also a new process of learning and unlearning, where you have to kind of wear a corporate business hat sometimes more than your legal hat? Like if you were an outside, at a law firm, client comes to you, you can just give them legal advice, but here you have to also wear the business hat, think about revenues, the quarter, what makes business sense of investments and not. So is that somewhere you're juggling and finding a different side of your corporate personality or a new side of your own career growth?
When I moved from working at a law firm to in-house, one of the things I would struggle with, like, who's paying for my time, right? Like, as a lawyer, you sort of live your life in increments of 15
Mhm.
minutes, right? You also, as if you're part of the partnership, are worried about rainmaking. Those are the things that you sort of leave behind when you move in-house. However, I think your approach to the law changes, right? So, as when we turn, for example, to our partners who are, um, uh, providing advice to us, we're looking for the pure legal analysis. But when you bring that legal analysis in-house, you apply it to a set of facts and then decide that what is the risk that you want to take as an organization. So there are certain boundaries that you operate within. Obviously, companies are not going to do anything which is not permitted by law, but within those bounds you decide, do I sign this contract, and what is the risk framework of that? What are the possible consequences? How do I mitigate for that, right? And I think that process becomes more intense when you're in house versus when you're sort of looking in from the outside, right? So that's one part of it. Second, I think you end up working very, very closely with your colleagues in different aspects of the organization, be it, the sales guys, the delivery guys, finance, HR, whatever you have, right? And hearing their perspectives as to how they look at a issue allows you also to sort of overlay that with your own thoughts. And you take some of the decisions based on those filters as well. um, your primary job and my primary job as the chief legal officer is to make sure that the legal risks are highlighted, evaluated, mitigated against. But we also do that keeping in mind the bigger picture of the business, right? What are the business realities? And yes, that is somewhat unique to in-house counsel. As outside lawyers, you don't get to do that, but you're trading some of what you would do as outside counsel for in-house counsel. Same core, a little bit different on the edges.
Yeah, a little bit on the edges for sure. I have a question on that. I mean, because you're a lawyer right now at a tech firm, and tech is just changing everything, right? We speak about your technology changing everything, even how we approach our legal minds. Maybe we'll have legal GPT at one point. Who knows? Maybe it exists. I don't know. In your experience today, do you see yourself as a technology leader, a legal leader, or maybe a bit of both?
Yeah. I think I'll sort of do the cop out and say a bit of both. It is actually a bit of both. Because, look, I think any successful professional who's giving legal advice needs to know their client, right? Like, get to know your customer, get to know your customer. Now, we have one customer, which is Infosys, and we happen to do technology, right? And you'll see, even outside counsel, while the skills of a lawyer are fungible and can go from industry to industry, you do develop some industry expertise, right? So we have to understand technology. And you're right, the pace of change is coming at us at a very, very rapid pace, right? So take artificial intelligence. You mentioned ChatGPT, for example. We look at it through the following lenses. One, what does it mean for us to offer AI related services to our clients, right? Like, how are we evaluating those parameters? What is our relationship with providers of LLMs? What is our relationship with our customers who are going to adopt this, right? How do we provide for and mitigate issues around hallucination, data veracity, or everything else that we would sort of put in the bucket of responsible AI. So that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is, how do we deal with different groups within Infosys who want to adopt artificial intelligence? What does that risk look like as we evaluate third party software? And then finally, and equally importantly, is how is the legal team looking at that, right? Like, how are we going to stay current? How are we going to make sure that we as a team are also staying abreast of latest technological developments that allows us to do our best work, right? So those are the ways that we think uh, of technology. Do you have to know how to code? Absolutely not. But should you be able to understand how technology works? What are the services that we are providing? Unless we do that, our team will not be successful. So you've got to understand the technology. And if you're a lawyer, there's a presumption, and a strong one, that you understand the law and you're able to bring the two together.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how fast paced it is right now. Things are changing in a New York minute. You know, you even though Infosys is Indian at origins, but IT services, we live in a world where data crosses border faster than people or planes, and it's also global in nature. Infosys, again, maybe Indian origin, but it's got a global presence and global footprint. How has that shaped you as a global leader? The whole idea of working across borders with people and understanding cultural traits, cultural quirks, and experiences. How has that shaped you personally?
Look, I think that is one of the most exciting parts of my job, being able to work across, literally, sort of follow the sun, if you will. Um, the India piece, the US piece we've talked about, but we have presence across Europe, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, 55 plus countries. And you can't know everything about everything, but you do learn to uh, appreciate that there are going to be differences in the legal framework, right? So, number one. Number two, you have to learn to ask the right questions. And the smartest thing that you can do is staff yourself up with good lawyers in in parts of the world where you have significant presence, and where you don't have lawyers, you have good partners that are external law firms who can provide you the right guidance, right? So that is the exciting part, right? You learn something new every day, and you understand that not everything works in the same way across all jurisdictions, right? Whether it's hiring an employee and advising our HR teams, to what are the risks associated with the contract and how different jurisdictions look at it. And that's the process of learning. That's the process of learning to not only appreciate the differences in law, but figuring out how you rely on your teams. Different people, different questions, sort of uh, keeping that skill of being able to drill past and ask the right questions, so that ultimately you can make the right decisions for your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you spoke about, your challenges that you faced early on in your career was, especially in India, it's very hard for people to take you seriously. And a lot of eminent women lawyers have gone through this, even famous ones on our show, like Zia Modi has spoken about this as well. Um, so, because when you started off, boardrooms looked a lot more homogeneous. The pathway was not as well chalked out, very few women leaders to look up to. They were there, but not as much, obviously, and more so now, and may more so come through. So, how did you go about shattering your glass ceiling? What were sort of the words of wisdom or inspiration that you sought from mentors or even people at home to just kind of power your ways through this male-dominated system?
Many times it is a happy coincidence of being at the right place at the right time. That's one part of it. Two, the ethos of saying that you will seize every opportunity that comes your way, recognizing those opportunities and pushing through those. Three, making sort of the right alliances, you're building your network so that you have the right opportunities being available to you, at least to assess. And sometimes you have to take some bold leaps and decisions, right? So, um, somewhere along my career, as I was working in California, I got an opportunity to relocate to India. And this was at a time when I had a son who was in high school, so not an easy decision to take, but we did relocate back to India as a family for 5 years. um, and and I'm not saying that that's something that works for everybody, but making some of those leaps of faith are important. That can certainly change the trajectory of your career. Two, making sure that if you get an opportunity, whether it's to work on a project that could be challenging, whether it could be to work with people that you've not worked with before, you just take those opportunities, because when you take those opportunities, you certainly will get, you'll be able to showcase what you can bring as value to the table, right? And as far as the sort of gender related issues or challenges are concerned, I think finding people that, even if you don't know them, even if they're not your mentors, seeing people as to what is possible is can be inspirational in many ways, right? Like you see the, as a young executive when I was working in India, seeing some of the women leaders just was very, very inspirational. So that's one part of it. Second, as and when you get the opportunity and you get a seat at the table, just make sure you find your voice around that and you speak up, so that you're not just sitting and occupying physical space, but you're also capturing the the ability for mind share, if you will, at that moment, right? So uh, find your voice in that moment. And a lot of people are shy around, sort of hanging around at the edges, second guessing whether they belong there or they don't belong there. My view is that if you've been invited into a meeting, you certainly belong there, and what you do with it after that is really up to you, right? So seize every opportunity that you get to be able to demonstrate what you can bring to the table, whether it's for a man, woman, any other professional. And hopefully that hard work, your creativity, and demonstrating what you can bring to the party, if you will create opportunities for you to be recognized. But I just go back to saying again and again that um, if you get an opportunity to do something which would be a stretch goal for you or beyond what you believe that you're capable of, just do it. You will find the strength to be able to deliver if you're determined.
Yeah, that's actually very profound because in my limited career, when I have younger students ask me something, as a Harry Potter fan, I always tell them resilience is like the Gryffindor sword. It'll come to you when you need it the most. And I think Potterheads will get that. Apologies, someone's not a Potterhead. Someone will explain it to you. But um, I was reading something about, you said about lessons through leadership, through mentorship rather, and it was fascinating because what you touched on right now, like embrace the opportunity, because there is a sense of excitement and new adventure. It's scary, but it's a sense of excitement. And I just want to talk about some of the lessons you've learned because this is fascinating. You said different people will guide you. Sometimes it comes from observing behaviors, what to do and what not to do. And the more important thing that you mentioned is something that my dad always told me, because we are human, we always get worked up on things. But you said never decide to react when you're upset or emotionally charged. Avoid knee-jerk reaction. That's so much so even writing an email but keeping it in draft, because the a quick moment of reacting, it seems good in the moment, but then you repent. You have a lifetime to repent after that. So just tell us about that, finding that zen, that calm. That's almost like good meditation techniques.
Yeah, there's something to be said about when people tell you take a deep breath, right? So it not only calms you down but also gives you a moment of pause. Sometimes you need to be in a position where your defenses are up, and you need to react to a particular situation if it's, if it's an emergency. But more often than not, in today's world, when we are where we are reacting over electronic media, etc., I think a knee-jerk reaction probably brings out the worst possible thing that you can have. Knee jerks only work if your life's being threatened and you've got to literally shove somebody physically away.
Hmm.
But that pause that you take, right, and then reflect, even if it's to say, I'm going to go for a walk along the block, come back and see if I still feel the same way when I've literally calmed down, put some distance between the situation. And that calmer reaction will allow you to take a better decision, right? You're not being driven by sort of uh, pulse racing, heart pounding kind of reactions. We're not sort of in war situations. So that's one. Uh, Two, I think sort of if you do feel the need to react in a way that nobody can see it, right? Like react in a very personal, safe space, and then bring your more calmer, thought through process to the solution, because aggravating the situation is not going to help anybody, right? So I would say that's the second thing. um, and then when things are calmer, you can have the more difficult conversation away from uh, that incident, if you will, when you need calmer heads on both sides to be able to have that conversation, right? Like you need both parties need to sort of de-escalate. And then the final thing I'll say, on being able to react also, and particularly in what we do, is just focus on the content rather than on the person, right?
Hmm.
That's equally important. We all get biased by who's saying rather than what is being said. And to be able to filter that and say, let me focus on the what rather than the who. So then I bring my best advice to the table and not be carried away by the bias that you may have with regard to a particular individual.
That's actually very profound, Preet, because sometimes we are not able to deracinate and bifurcate the message from the messenger. And I think that's as human beings, that's where our internal bias comes in, right? Like we just kind of think that,
Right.
someone could say good day, and because the message is not bad, but if we have a certain pre-existing notion about that person, we may think, are they being snarky because my day didn't start off well because I missed the bus? So that is also important. And I think this is not just a good insights from a great lawyer and a tech leader, but also this is also like good therapy 101 for all of us. Speaking of words of inspiration, this is my personal story, or what I really my parents always introduced me to Sudha Murthy and her words of wisdom, and I got to know her without her being Mrs. Narayan Murthy. And of course, this is Power of She, a women-led podcast where we have inspirational women leaders. So I'd be remiss talking to someone in Infosys without talking about Sudha Murthy. Her writings influenced a lot of us growing up. It was a sense of altruism, a sense of inspiration. It was also a sense of finding humility in those profound moments. So, has she played a big influence in your work, your life, and your words of wisdom when you give to mentees as well?
I am very fortunate to having worked with her. When I joined Infosys, she was the chairperson at Infosys Foundation. And to see her having built that foundation really out of passion, right? She didn't need to do this. But, there are people who do philanthropy by writing checks. There are people who do philanthropy by running foundations. But there are very few who bring those two and the willingness to roll up their sleeves and say, I'm actually going to do the work and go to these far flung places. And, whether it's a natural disaster situation or helping somebody else out by, uh, like literally doing the work, if you will, right? So that is really very, very inspirational. And so that's one part of her that I got to know and deeply admired, that she could have just sat in an office and doled out money to the right causes, but she's the one who chose and said, I'm going to go to a remote part of India, go and see actually how the rest of India lives, and then see what difference I'm making in their lives, right? Very, very difficult to do. We are all creatures of comfort. So you've got to have nothing but deep admiration for that aspect of her being. Second, I think, you've seen her through her writings, right? Not
Mhm.
everything. I mean, that's a different aspect of her. And there's one part of her that I was really, really touched by and have failed horribly to embrace is when she decided that she was going to give up acquiring any new things that she did not need. Particularly, I think it was a reference to buying clothes and things like that, right? Look, she's a person of tremendous means and doesn't have to restrain herself. So again, sort of that simplicity that came through that story, very, very powerful. And she has several others. And then, her continuing to grow as an individual. So clearly a brilliant engineering student, builds the foundation and is now serving the nation as a leader. uh, deep admiration for her.
Absolutely. I used to look forward to it. In fact, I think that's what convinced me to become a reader. Like, oh, I think a column would come in the Reader's Digest or one of those magazines, and I'd look forward to. I think every week, and and my it's something that my parents always spoke about fondly about Mr. Murthy and his wife. It's not just the brilliance or what they built, but it's the values. I think that is intrinsically
Correct.
important because the respect is not something that can be given; it's something that's earned. And I think and then I think that just resonates through the company culture. Um, you know, I've
Yeah,
always
the
asked this.
simplicity. I think they're sort of embracing simplicity in its very, very basic form. Is
Yeah, and I think
it's
that
somewhat unique and admirable. Yeah.
that juxtaposes that with a lot of other people and a lot of other wealth that we've seen across the world. So I think that you already said the simplicity is richness, to use the irony of all ironies. Um, I've always been fascinating with this conversation because I was once an aspiring lawyer myself. Don't know if I'd be a very good one. So, but when I was talking to Ms. Modi or one of our other legal leaders, and Mrs. Menon, I there's something fascinating about lawyers. Like even in India's framework, we have Mr. Ambedkar who helped draft the constitution, and two of the biggest stalwarts in India's independence movement, Mr. Gandhi, Mr. Nehru, all eminent lawyers. Even Mr. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the Iron Man of India. And even in the US here, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, people who don't need an introduction, were all legal minds. There are plenty of professions that produce outstanding individuals, engineering and tech minds, as you work with, the medical professional. But what do you think is the secret sauce of the legal profession that produces these kind of policy perspicacious thinkers? Put you on the spot there.
No, it's a question that you often think about, right? Particularly, almost every country has had the benefit of having leading lawyers become their leading lights, if you will, right? You talked about perhaps many of these people who were attracted to the profession of law was by the desire of doing the right thing for people, right? The law says that the law is blind. You want to treat everybody equally, fairly, justice for all. So these are sort of large, big words. And how do they translate, right? They translate into saying a promise to uphold the constitution of both these democratic countries, which means that you're going to make sure that legal protection is offered to everybody who's entitled to it. Two, I think lawyers also by training acquire two skills. One is the skill of analysis. Like ultimately, what are you doing? You're looking at a problem statement, applying the rule of law to it, and figuring out through your analysis what's the right answer and how do you come to a decision. And finally, it's the skill of oration, right? Like most lawyers learn how to speak well,
Mhm.
which allows them then to in some cases, become inspirational speakers as they go through their journeys. And some lawyers who've decided to embrace public service are able to bring all of this together, right? And deep thanks, gratitude for them for raising the flag of the legal profession, particularly in turbulent times, right? Like many democracies have been led by lawyers in times of trouble, whether in the case of India, it was the struggle for independence.
Yeah.
In the US, presidents early on in our history. And I think perhaps it's the love for the rule of law It's the analytical thinking and the ability to orate well, speak well, so that you can rally a crowd behind you. And if you combine that, which I think probably is the most important ingredient, is the desire for service, right? Like public service. So these are the ingredients that make for lawyers who've been inspirational, leading lights in both India and in the US.
Interpret, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you so much for being on The Power of She. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm very grateful for these pearls of wisdom that you shared.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've certainly enjoyed our conversation and appreciate this opportunity very much.